recruitment. The foster care review does so. I'd be happy to make sure that the member meets Ian Campbell, the Minister, to discuss further what can be done in his own area.
Thank you. We now move to First Minister's questions. Question number 1, Joanne Lamont.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what engagements he has planned for the rest of the day.
First Minister.
Later today, I'll be doing one or two wee things to take forward the Government's programme for Scotland.
Joanne Lamont. Order. Joanne Lamont.
That's such a relief to me, because I think we know that one person's wee things is another person's ridiculous frippery. On Tuesday, in what the Financial Times described as the highest profile intervention yet from business, the Chief Executive of BP, Bob Dudley, said he was against Scotland leaving the United Kingdom. He said there was too much uncertainty, including what currency an independent Scotland would use. In response, the First Minister told BBC Scotland that, and I quote, "Of course, there are many, many chief executives who are firmly in favour of Scottish independence." Could the First Minister now name the many, many chief executives of oil companies like BP who are in favour of Scottish independence?
Well,
First Minister.
There are hundreds of people in business for Scotland who are Scottish businesses arguing for welfare and benefit to the people of Scotland from independence. But I thought the most important thing that Bob Dudley said is that the investment plans of BP, announced very recently, of course, just in the last 2 years, would be continuing. And of course, that's absolutely right, because they are done on an economic basis. And BP recognise that just as over the last 40 years, it's been extremely business sensible and lucrative for them to invest in the North Sea, so that will be the case over the next 40 years. So I think what we should do in these matters is look at the investment decisions. We should look at the sparkling performance, to quote Ernst & Young, of inward investment in Scotland. We should look at the substantial investment decisions that are being made in Scotland. That's what indicates the confidence in Scotland's future, and that's what Joanne Lamont should recognise are not wee things, but very substantial things indeed.
Joanne Lamont.
The First Minister's got a problem with the big things, like answering the question he was asked. Now, not for the first time does the First Minister decide for other people what they're saying. He tells the rest of the United Kingdom what's in their interest in relation to the currency. He tells Europe what they think about what might happen in the future to Scotland. He's now telling Bob Dudley what he thinks about the future for his company is listen to what he says rather than asserting what he says. But BP have invested £35 billion in the North Sea. They are planning to invest another £10 billion by 2017. BP's North Sea investment employs 4,000 people, and they have extracted to date more than 5 billion barrels of oil and gas. I suggest we should listen to what Bob Dudley says. The First Minister said that many, many chief executives back Scottish independence. So I ask again, can the First Minister name the many, many chief executives of companies comparable to BP who back independence?
First Minister.
Well, as I said, Business for Scotland has hundreds of members of people arguing for independence for Scotland. But they accuse me of putting words in Bob Dudley's mouth. But so I just quote him exactly from the Express of the 5th of February, talking about projects including the Greater Clare Exploration Scheme. They'll keep production going past 2050. I was quoting him exactly in pointing out the substantial investments that BP and other companies are making in the waters around Scotland at the present moment. Now, it wasn't always like that, because, and I have a range of quotes here, the investment dried up under the period of Labour government because of the constant tax changes, not to mention the 2011 Alexander Osborne swipe at the industry, which also dried up investment. That's why production has been declining over the last few years. However, thanks to the investment that's going in, Oil and Gas UK forecast that production could reach 2 million barrels a day by the end of the decade, up from 1.5 million barrels a day in 2013. So I think the investment talks. But, you know, I do think what Bob Dudley said is important. But I've been looking at what another Bob was saying in the Herald today. Bod Holman is the latest Labour stalwart. Well, he's Keir Hardy's biographer, and therefore I think is somebody who should be listened to with some respect. I am a member of the Labour Party, which is against Scottish independence, but I'll be voting yes in September. My decision is not because I have strong nationalistic feelings, because I believe in democracy and equality. So perhaps Joanne Lamont should also listen to the many Labour Party members, Alec Mawson, Charles Gray, Mary Lockhart, John Mulvey, who have been declaring for yes. Look at the reasons why they're declaring for yes, and perhaps even she will decide to see the arguments for justice, equality, prosperity and investment in an independent Scotland.
Joanne Lamont.
Sorry, I was only taking the First Minister at his word when he said there were many, many chief executives who supported independence. And having said it, I presumed he would be able to give us at least one, rather than all of that displacement activity there. On Tuesday, the Chief Executive of Sainsbury's, Justin King, said of Scotland, "Once it is a separate country, we and other retailers will take a view of what the cost structure is of that industry, and of course the revenue structure too. If you were to strike that today, there is no doubt Scotland is a more costly country in which to run a grocery retail business." So Sainsbury's says there are negative consequences to independence. So does Asda. So does Morrison. Together they employ... Well, it may not matter to you, but it matters to shop workers the length and breadth of this country. The chief executives of BP, Sainsbury's, Asda, Morrisons have all warned about the consequence of independence. The First Minister says there are many, many chief executives in favour of his plan. Again, I ask him, name the many, many chief executives of businesses comparable to BP and the supermarkets who actually back him.
First Minister.
The supermarket argument fell flat when it was run the first time in December. It falls flat again. But it's not shop workers that Joanne Lamont's quoting. You see, this is the point about the argument about what's important to Scotland. Margaret Curran in the Daily Record today, we need to stop talking like the political elite. Joanne Lamont talks about nothing else but the political elite this question. Margaret Curran says, "I could talk till the cows come home about currency unions, but if you're sitting at home at night watching television, that's not the language you talk in." That is the exact point. Let's talk the language of people. Let's talk about jobs, investment. Let's talk about transformation of childcare. Let's talk about the bedroom tax. Let's talk about what this Parliament has achieved. And don't cite the elite. Cite the people of Scotland who are rallying to independence.
Joanne, order. Order, Joanne Lamont. Miss Lamont, order.
Well, it's obvious
Ms.
that
Lamont.
the First Minister's special advisers have been on double time trying to find him words to put in a space when he doesn't have to answer the question. It is precisely because we are concerned about the consequences of ordinary people we challenge the First Minister on his obsession for the last 40 years. But isn't it the case that rule number 1 in Alex Salmond's Book of Communication is to assert something untrue and keep on repeating it often enough in the hope that people believe it, to be true even when it's not? The First Minister cannot explain what the currency would be in an independent Scotland, but every major supermarket, not the elite, every major supermarket can say that the price of groceries would go up, and the chief executive of one of our biggest oil companies has recommended that Scots reject separation. The Institute of Chartered Accountants say that he has failed to answer basic questions on pensions. The First Minister's response is to stick his fingers in his ears and carry on regardless. At what point does the First Minister acknowledge that the Chief Executive of BP, that our supermarkets, that ICAS maybe know what they are talking about and accept that leaving the UK will be bad for the people of Scotland?
First Minister.
Oil industry.
Order. First Minister.
Commenting on the White Paper, Malcolm Wegg, Chief Executive of Oil and Gas UK, representing the whole industry, said, "We are particularly encouraged with commitments to encourage exploration and measures to maximise the economic recovery of the oil and gas reserves. We welcome reassurance on future decommissioning relief and the commitment to consult on future fiscal changes." So, Dr. Joanne Lamont, well, I'm quoting about the things that matter. The investment dried up during the period of Labour government because of taxation changes. It dried up during the 2011 after the Dawn raid from Osborne and Danny Alexander, and now investment is surging in the North Sea and the waters round Scotland, which will take place and therefore increase production. But, you know, our advisers didn't have to work into the wee small hours to find these quotations that Joanne Lamont, it was page 8 and 9 of the Daily Record this very morning. Yeah, it said exactly what Joanne Lamont wanted. But this is Margaret Curran, her friend and ally. I'm not even talking about the Labour MPs who are not going to turn up at the conference because they don't like her policies. I'm talking about her friend and ally. We need to stop talking like the political elite and start talking about the issues that really matter to people in the street, the wee things, the things that really matter. I could talk till the cows come home about currency unions, but if you're sitting at home at night watching television, that's not the language you're talking. Won't she take advice from Margaret Curran if she won't take advice from me? And as far as the question of what the government's doing in terms of getting chief executives, one senior defence executive quoted in the FT this very morning, commenting on the use of the dark arts. The government's putting pressure. The government, that's the UK government, is putting pressure. Well, I'm just quoting the Financial Times. And I'm sure because of her friendship to all these chief executives, Joanne Lamont reads it every morning. The government, the UK government, is putting pressure on companies to speak out against independence, suggesting anxiety about the opinion polls and the referendum result. That's what's happening at the present moment. And that's exactly why the wee things like jobs, investment, the bedroom tax, transformational childcare will carry the day in September.
Question number 2, Ruth Davidson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister when he will next meet the Prime Minister.
First Minister.
Well, no plans, but I think there's a very good chance of meeting the Prime Minister on the 24th of February in Aberdeen. If reports are accurate, he and his ministers will be in Dice as the same day as the Scottish Government Cabinet will be in Portlethen, just 10 miles apart. Now, instead of talking down to Scotland from the seat of power in London, I know that the STV studios in Aberdeen are free that evening. That surely is the evening where the debate can take place that people in Scotland want to see.
Order. Ruth Davidson.
Not waving but drowning and sounding increasingly desperate, but I can see why he wants to throw the chaff out there.
Order.
Presiding Officer.
Order.
Presiding Officer. Today's Justice Committee report makes clear that the case has not been made for abolishing the general requirement for corroboration. It asks the Government to look again at this hugely controversial proposal. That is a significant and rare intervention. Can I ask the First Minister for his response?
First Minister.
The response is from the Justice Secretary, who has asked Lord Bonamy to look at the safeguards in the matter. Now, Lord Bonamy's credentials in these things surely cannot be disputed, and as the human rights judge and practitioner over many, many years, hugely respected. And I think it's right and proper that the Justice Secretary has asked someone of his distinction to review the legislation and make absolutely clear that in changing and removing the general rule of corroboration, there is not the risk of miscarriage of justice. But I would ask Ruth Davidson to reflect that we know there are miscarriages of justice taking place in Scotland at the present moment. And these miscarriages of justice are the hundreds, some people would argue thousands of cases, which cannot come to court, and victims who don't get their day in court, who don't get access to justice, because instead of deciding on the sufficiency of evidence, which is the general principle in law across many jurisdictions, we have uniquely a general rule of corroboration, which makes it impossible to take some cases, particularly sexual cases, particularly domestic violence cases, into court. So if we can, and Lord Bonamy's review, can identify with appropriate parliamentary safeguards the route forward, then surely that is something, in terms of the concern for victims, that all of this Parliament could find its way to support it.
Ruth Davidson.
Presiding Officer, I do not doubt this Government's concern for victims. Every party in this Parliament is concerned about victims, but victims of crime are best served by secure and sound convictions. Removing the requirement of corroboration permanently changes a criminal justice system that has served this country for centuries. It should not be considered lightly. The Law Society of Scotland, the Faculty of Advocates, the Scottish Human Rights Commission, 2 former heads of the judiciary, all say that this plan is wrong. And this is now about the integrity of this Parliament. What we as members are being asked to do is to vote through a bill that we know to be deeply flawed on the grounds that Kenny McCaskill says he'll sort it later. There is an obvious solution here. Leave the scrapping of corroboration out of the bill. Ask Lord Bonamy to report on the whole issue, and then let us look at it again. Surely, First Minister, it is better to make good law later than bad law now.
First Minister.
As the proposal come back, it would come back after Lord Bonamy's findings to, firstly, committee, to consultation, and then to this Parliament. It is impossible to argue that the integrity of Parliament is jeopardised by something that requires both committee and parliamentary support. That's the safeguard. Now, I think Ruth Davidson should have a very close look at what the Lord President said this morning. The Lord President voiced his concerns at the committee, but he said today that he was grateful for the Cabinet Secretary for his sensitive response to the widespread discussion of the proposal and for letting him see the terms of reference. The proposed review will enable this issue to be looked at in greater length by a body of experienced professionals, and the terms of reference should allow a thorough consideration of the issues. Now, if the Lord President can welcome the review group by Lord Bonamy, then I think this entire Parliament should welcome it with the parliamentary safeguards. But let me turn to Ruth Davidson, because when this issue was raised, I think by Willie Rennie a few weeks ago, I gave a reference to a case, and I think some of the press corps were confused about the reference. So I want to make this exactly clear. This is the Lee Cyrus case. This is a case of someone the trial could not be brought in Scotland because of a lack of corroboration. And the point is this, that our colleague Murdo Fraser appeared on STV News on the 13th December. This is what he said. I'm very concerned that we're not seeing criminal proceedings in Scotland against this individual. This is an issue that the Justice Secretary, Kenny McCaskill, needs to be looking at to see why this is the case and why his victims here in Scotland are not getting justice. The reason that the victims in Scotland were not getting justice was the general rule of corroboration. The Solicitor General's letter to Annabel Ewing of the 31st of December, there was no prosecution because of a lack of corroboration. So in that case, but more importantly, in hundreds, perhaps thousands of others, cases cannot get into court, not because of a sufficiency of evidence, but because of a general rule which is unprecedented in any other legal system. That is why it's right and proper, with the appropriate safeguards, that the Parliament looks at things. And I could say to Ruth Davidson, yes, indeed, it's right and proper to question this. But what's not right and proper is for one member of our party to demand from the Justice Secretary an explanation why a case can't get to court, and then when to find out it's through lack of corroboration, not have the integrity to come to the Parliament and say he now understands that. And it's not acceptable to have a Tory representative on a committee who refuses to acknowledge the demands of our own party when they're on STV.
Question number 3, Willie Rennie.
To ask the First Minister what issues will be discussed at the next meeting of the Cabinet.
First Minister.
Issues of importance to the people of Scotland.
Willie Rennie.
I heard what the First Minister said to Ruth Davidson on corroboration. But to say he needs somebody as distinguished as Lord Bonamy to fix the problem simply shows how bad it has got. Appointing Lord Bonamy doesn't restore justice. It simply papers over the cracks with a veneer of respectability. Isn't it better to work out the fix before you deliberately cause the problem? Lawmaking in reverse is a shoddy way to expect Scotland's Parliament to act. Doesn't the First Minister see that?
First Minister.
I don't think Willie Rennie is expressing the position fairly. I think the appointment of Lord Bonamy is, as the Lord President said today, a sensitive response to the widespread discussion of the proposal. And I would have hoped that at least could be welcomed across the Parliament. It's not a quick fix. It's a distinguished judge who's looking to make absolutely certain that as this change is made, then appropriate safeguards are there to prevent miscarriage of justice. That is a substantial point. And any recommendations before implementation would have to come back to the committee, back for discussion, and back to this Parliament for approval. By definition, this change cannot take place unless and until this Parliament is satisfied with the proposals that come forward. So given that the Justice Secretary has been prepared to do that, can Willie Rennie not accept that there is a real problem? Because after his second question, I'm going to come on to the people who have identified the real problem, who are asking for justice. So can he not accept that the way forward that the Justice Secretary has indicated is one that reasonable people can say, if we can protect against miscarriage of justice, then surely we should allow these hundreds, these thousands of people access to justice?
Rennie.
But what he's actually doing is asking Lord Bonamy to fit new locks to the stable a year after the horse will have bolted. He gives soothing words in this chamber, but he knows this is a complete shambles. 3 weeks ago, I warned the First Minister that his plans on corroboration were crackers. He said they were exactly the right thing to do. I said the Justice Secretary was cack-handed. The First Minister said he was doing his best. Since then, Kenny McCaskill rushed an unsigned letter to the committee just minutes before the report was finalised. And within minutes of the publication, he rejected the report. The First Minister knows this is a shambles and cannot go on. Will he now overrule the Justice Secretary before he causes serious damage?
First Minister.
Well, two things. I think Willie Rennie actually thinks that somebody of the distinction of Lord Bonamy accepts a remit in a matter of minutes and in a rush. Then he seriously underrates the distinction of the judge concerned and the seriousness with which he'll discharge his responsibilities. And can I just repeat, just so that this is well understood, that nothing in this can happen unless it carries the committee and eventually this Parliament. It will not be implemented unless and until that happens. But let us hear the other side of the matter. This is a press release from Rape Crisis this morning. Rape Crisis Scotland is extremely disappointing that the Justice Committee has been unable to back the removal of the requirement for corroboration. Let's listen to Mary Ann Davidson, someone who has waived her right of anonymity, to point out, and I think in very, very reasonable language to the committee, that the impact of the general rule of corroboration, which made it impossible for a successful prosecution as a victim of a very, very serious crime, points out the impact of this is not something that victims are making up. It isn't something that victims are making up. Because we have a general rule which makes it impossible to bring many cases to court. And I know in the Labour benches there are people who believe this. It was in the Labour Party manifesto that this should be changed, because there are many hundreds, perhaps thousands of people who cannot, because of this general rule, bring their cases to court or get their cases brought to court. Then there is a feeling of serious injustice. So let me say again, if Lord Bonamy can review and can provide for safeguards to make sure that there is no danger of miscarriage of justice, then surely this Parliament in its heart can find a way and a means of allowing these thousands of people to get access to justice, so that justice can be and seen to be done.
Question number 4 to me.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what representations the Scottish Government is making to the UK Government regarding its legal ability to provide extra financial assistance to those affected by the bedroom tax.
First Minister.
Well, I think there was, I was going to say general agreement across the chamber, general agreement apart from the Conservative Party in the debate yesterday, that the proper mechanism to provide regular financial assistance directly to tenants affected by the bedroom tax is through discretionary housing payments. The Scottish Government has made a substantial number of representations to the UK Government in this matter, starting the 31st of January 2012, when Keith Brown, as the responsible minister at that stage, asked for an amendment for the bedroom tax to exempt those that couldn't downsize. Then we asked for exemptions for the most vulnerable. Then, of course, Margaret Burgess, on the 6th of March 2013, asked for the scrapping of the bedroom tax. Then we asked for the DHP funding to be raised so that we could back it in terms of Scotland. And, of course, we are now asking for that ceiling to be removed so that discretionary housing payments as the best mechanism to provide that assistance to people in Scotland who are suffering from the bedroom tax to get the help they deserve. I think this week has been a good week for this Parliament because we've been addressing the issues of great popular concern in Scotland. And one of these issues, most certainly, is the iniquity and injustice of the bedroom tax.
Thank the First Minister for that answer. Does he agree with me that it was no wee thing for the parties in this chamber to put aside their differences and unite to approve the budget yesterday? But the time has come for the UK Government and Ian Duncan-Smith to do the right thing, to raise the cap on the level of discretionary housing payments in order to mitigate fully the impact of the obscene and hated bedroom tax on 80,000 people in Scotland. To do it, and to do it now.
First Minister.
Well, there's two issues, and I absolutely agree with Jim Eadie. Removing the cap is a simple thing to do, no cost to Westminster, and could be completed by the 1st of April. We await the DWP's answer. We should also bear in mind the wise words of Carwyn Jones, whose administration has taken a different route, who pointed out in the Welsh Assembly this very week that the powers of a devolved Assembly can allow to mitigate, but there has a danger, as he put it, that things that should be scrapped at UK level are forced as an extra cost onto Scotland and Wales. This Parliament cannot mitigate the full extent of the injustice of the welfare changes being visited upon the people of Scotland. That's exactly why this Parliament should have control over these matters so as we can implement social justice in this country.
Question 5, Rhoda Grant.
To ask the First Minister what steps beyond minimum pricing the Scottish Government will take to tackle alcohol misuse.
First Minister.
With an alcohol framework which contains over 40 actions to rebalance Scotland's relationship with alcohol through legislative change, through increased funding, through improved treatment and support services, and by building an environment that supports the cultural change that is necessary in the longer term. We have invested record sums in tackling alcohol misuse, £237 million since 2008. with £200 million targeted at treatment support services and prevention, including education and awareness campaigns.
I thank the First Minister for that response. Will he support the measures in Dr Richard Simpson's Shifting the Culture Bill, which includes limiting the amount of caffeine allowed in pre-mixed alcohol products? He'll be aware of the McKinley report, which studied young offenders in Polmont. It found that over 43% of those who could identify it consumed one particular brand of caffeinated alcohol, a brand that makes up less than 1% of the alcohol sales. Does he also agree that bottle tagging would identify those responsible for selling those products to those who are under the legal age for alcohol purchase?
First Minister.
Well, I've already said to Richard Simpson that we'll look carefully at all proposals, because this is something that the Parliament should act on jointly. I should say in the first point she made there is much dispute in terms of the basis of the research. The second point she made is something we're very willing to have a good look at. But I think Rhoda Grant should accept that the evidence, the substantial body of evidence, demonstrate affordability is a key driver of increased consumption, and addressing price is a crucial element of any credible long-term strategy. That's why this Government believes that a minimum price per unit of alcohol would be the most effective way to tackle misuse in Scotland as part of the wider package of measures that I've listed for Rhoda Grant.
Question number 6, Rod Campbell.
First Minister, what steps the Scottish Government is taking to reduce child poverty?
First Minister.
Well, there is progress being made in child poverty, and that progress was seen in a report published by the Joseph Rowntree Foundation at the weekend. It showed that child poverty had fallen 10 percentage points in the 10 years to 2011-12. That's about twice the decrease that's taken place in England. But nobody in this chamber can ignore the start warning from the Child Poverty Action Group that as a result of welfare cuts, it is possible that an additional 100,000 children will be forced back into poverty in families by 2020, which will reverse a substantial part of the improvements that have been made over the last 10 years.
Rod Campbell.
First Minister's answer. Can you tell me how independence would provide further opportunities to address child poverty?
First Minister.
Well, even for the Labour benches, I would have thought it would have been pretty obvious that when Child Poverty Action say the welfare changes affecting families across Scotland may put 100,000 children back into poverty, even the Labour benches might acknowledge that having control of these things in Scotland would be a tremendous asset and help in preventing that circumstance happening. Which is why only when Scotland's future is in Scotland's hands and this Parliament has the full powers of independence, it will truly be able to tackle child poverty and make sure that the wee things and the big things in Scotland are put to rights.
Jenny Mara.
Presiding Officer, how about tackling it now? Because children in 22 of the poorest primary schools in Dundee are having their early years practitioners removed to meet the 600 hours childcare commitment. This Parliament will pass more money for that. Will the First Minister meet the Leader of Dundee City Council to make sure that his childcare commitment will not come at the detriment of support for reading and writing in Primary 1?
First Minister.
Jenny Mara, yes, we're tackling it now. As a percentage of children in poverty before housing costs, when we came to office it was 21%. It's now 15%, substantially as part of the measures which have been taken by this government. But how exactly would Jenny Mara suggest we tackle it now when every serious child poverty organisation pinpoints the social security cuts and changes as the threat to child poverty in Scotland? Even though Jackie Baillie wants to keep them at Westminster, can't Jenny Mara have the courage to say they should be controlled in Scotland by this Parliament?
That ends First Minister's questions. Members who leave the chamber should do so quickly and quietly.